What's up, wizards? Welcome back to Across the Horizon, a collaborative series between Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology and Michael Beeson of Hacking Fate. Today is a double feature. We'll be covering aphorism 19 and 21 because they're both related to purging, which is a bit interesting and disgusting. We'll read a couple of the translations and then jump into the conversation.
Okay, this is the Ashman translation and says and this is 19. The efficacy of purgation is impeded by the moon's conjunction with Jupiter. And then 21, when the moon may be in Scorpio or Pisces, purgation may be advantageously used, provided the lord of the ascendant be coupled with some star posited below the earth. If he be coupled with a star placed above the earth, the potion swallowed will be vomited up.
All right, and I'll go ahead and aphorism 19, the Henry Coley translation. A purging medicine shall not operate so effectually when the moon is conjunct with Jupiter. And then for 21, when the moon is in Scorpio or Pisces and the lord of the ascendant is in aspect to a planet under the earth, it's good to give purging medicines. But if the lord of the ascendant apply to a planet above the earth, it's probable the sick shall vomit up his potion.
We're dealing with the traditional Galenic medicine, and the base of the traditional Galenic medicine were the four humors, which are associated with the four elements. So, for example, the sanguine temperament, which is hot and wet, and that's associated with blood. The choleric temperament, which is hot and dry, fiery element, that's yellow bile. And then we have melancholic humor, which is cold and dry, which is the earth element, and that's associated with black bile. And then watery element, phlegmatic nature, is associated with phlegm, which is cold and wet. So the key with this, and it's kind of interesting because we're used to traditional Chinese medicine, but there's a traditional Western medicine as well, and that's what this is, this Galenic medicine. And what's interesting about it is that modern medicine, allopathic, what's called allopathic medicine, not by the doctors, they just say it's medicine, essentially deals with symptoms. So if you have a headache, you take aspirin. What that does is it alleviates the inflammation. It doesn't necessarily deal with the underlying problem, but it deals with the symptoms. And the focus is on the symptoms. And it's also sort of, look at the cause. Like if you've got an infection, then you kill the bacteria or whatever. The traditional Galenic medicine was very much interested in balance. And so what they saw is, certain types of people, and you could again tell from your chart, what your tendency was in terms of your personality or your temperament, would tend to, like, for example, if you're melancholy, you tend to get depressed, you're tired and everything like that. You're essentially out of balance. So they were very big on bringing things into balance. One of the methodologies for bringing things into balance was basically purging. Now, purging is either laxative or vomiting. And so what's interesting with this is that you can see it right off the bat. There's this correlation between whether a planet is below the earth, right? And that's better for the purging, and whether it's above the earth, which causes the vomiting. So again, we're getting rid of the negative humors, the negative. For abundance of particular humor, you want to get rid of that. So that's what this is all about. Really, it's bringing the body back into balance. So it's a holistic medicine, and it's really kind of a shame that we decided to dump it, because we could again be doing traditional. And then there's people that are trying to bring back traditional Western medicine, and of course, astrology was a key part of it. If you were a doctor in the Renaissance and Middle Ages, you probably would be studying astrology at university when you're studying to be a doctor, and then you would have often used it as a way of diagnosing and then curing people. And this is part of the whole electional astrology that's used for various types of medical procedures. So right off the bat, there's some astrology there. With the purging, it says, make sure the lord of the ascendant, which would be the person, obviously the patient who is getting would be coupled with the planet below the earth for the purge, and again, above the earth, it'll be vomited out. Now, the moon's conjunction with Jupiter says the efficacy of purge is impeded by the moon's conjunction with Jupiter. Now, why is that? Well, Ramsay, this is from Astrology Restored, Astrology Restaurata, which is published in 1653. He talks about the moon aspecting certain planets. He says, if you're going to do a purge, don't have the moon aspect Saturn, Jupiter, or Mars. Now, you could sort of see why whether Saturn or Mars, because they're malefics. But he's really not looking at the malefic quality of it. He says, Saturn is cold, right? Saturn's cold and dry. It thickens the humors, and it impedes the medicine from, purging, and it's going to be too thick to expel. He says then that Jupiter is hot and wet is problematic because it helps the nature. In other words, it's producing, I guess it's because it's producing more and more humors. If you're producing a lot of something, if you're really pumping them out, then again, that's going to be problematic in terms of getting rid of it. And then it says for Mars that Mars sharpeneth the humors to the extraction of blood. Now, I had to really think about that. I did some searching on that. And I think what that's doing is, again, it's increasing them. It's magnifying the power of the humors. It's sharpening them. So again, if you're going to increase the humors, that's not really good either. So it's interesting. You can see again how the various natural states of the planets interact then with this medical procedure. Ramsay goes on to say that in fact, that if the moon applies to Venus, that she'll further the operation of the medicine and comfort the planet, which makes sense because that's, Venus is the benefic. That Jupiter, again, is just positive, and that it says it fortifies the nature, in this case, the natural, alter the kind of processes that are going on. Another interesting thing about signs is that, and they mention it here, the other one, the second one, 21, is that the moon in Scorpio or Pisces. Ramsay says you want to have the moon in a watery sign, which again sort of makes sense for a purge. You're trying to have a flow, you're trying to get rid of stuff, you're trying to move it all out. He says what you really want to avoid, though, are for purging is Aries, Taurus, Capricorn, or the last 15 degrees of Sagittarius, because these are signs that chew the cud, which is quite interesting. I hadn't heard that. There's all sorts of different qualifications of signs, like humane signs, like Aquarius or Gemini, Libra. Those are all humane signs because they have people in this. And it's supposed to be good. Like if you have a main sign rising, you're a humane person. If you have an animal sign rising, like Aries, you'd be animalistic. But these are, if you think about Aries is the ram, Taurus is the bull, Capricorn is a goat. Those are all things. And then Sagittarius is a centaur, right? So the first side of Sagittarius is the human part. And then the last part of Sagittarius is the horse part. So again, it's supposedly can choose the cud. So that's not good because it would retain the humors and it wouldn't expel them. That's very interesting. So I wanted to jump into another interesting thing that was that Ramsay mentioned. So we've gone this whole thing saying, okay, you don't want to have the moon aspect Jupiter, right? And because, he's increasing nature or whatever, and don't have him near Mars and Saturn. Okay, fine. Then we have a whole different set of things saying, okay, now if you're going to purge, talks about if you want to get rid of specific things. And Ramsay says, for example, to purge melancholy, then you want to have a sextile or trine, the moon applying to sextile or trine of Jupiter. And that makes sense because, again, the Jupiter's hot and wet, right? And melancholy is cold and dry. So that's the opposite, natural quality of it. And to purge choler, then you aspect Venus. So again, hot and dry, cold and wet, right? And then for phlegm, which is cold and wet, you apply to the sun, which is hot and dry. So that, again, I think the logic of that is pretty clear in terms of, so for those specific humors, you want to get a planet that's the opposite effect, and that will get rid of the excess of that particular humor. Then he has another one that's interesting where it says, if you'd purge the spleen, it says, let not Saturn be strong in the heaven, because the spleen is ruled by Saturn, and then give your medicine in the hour of Jupiter and let him be well dignified and well disposed. Again, you've got the sort of opposite. Saturn is cold and dry. You've got Jupiter that's hot and wet, and that operates because the spleen is what you're focusing on, and it has these particular characteristics. Then you want to have something that's opposite to those. And then, so it says when Mercury is strong, purge not the lungs, again, because Mercury rules the lungs. Mars, purge not the gall. That's what Mars rules, et cetera, et cetera. If that particular planet that rules the thing is strong, then again, you're not going to be as effective in getting rid of the qualities, the negativity or the humors out of that thing. So again, you've got, what I love about this is it's very nuanced, because it's not like never, there's one rule, never apply to the Jupiter. Well, that depends on the circumstances, and also probably depends on the source. These are coming together because Ramsay's citing multiple sources there. He's jumping around. He cites the aphorisms actually. It's nice and circular because he cites the aphorism, and we're turning around and using him to explain how the aphorism works. But he cites Al-Kindi, other sources. But again, depending on what you're going to do, you're going to have a different approach. And there's a sort of logic to how they're proceeding. There's not just one rule. It's very nuanced depending on what you're working with and what you're trying to accomplish.
We also have another translation thing going on too with this one. So Ashmond and Partridge both said when the moon is in Virgo or Pisces instead of Scorpio or Pisces. So what is up with Virgo in this way?
Oh, weird. That's another. So Coley says Virgo. Wow. Yeah.
Well, Coley says
a watery
Scorpio.
Sign. Oh, Scorpio.
Right.
Sign. Who says Virgo?
Yeah. Ashmond and Partridge both.
So, well, that's a sort of mysterious one. That's like as to why Virgo would be thrown in there. We had the watery signs. Well, that makes sense to us, but right, why Virgo's tossed in there again? I don't know. I could make something up, or I could just be honest and say, I don't know what's going on there. So I think that's what I'm going to prefer to stick with, is say, we just don't know why Virgo is in there. What we do know is that's what the source says. So, and maybe I'll just, if I'm purging, I'll just go with that, and I won't necessarily go against the source just because I don't understand. The modern approach would be like, well, if I don't immediately understand it, I'm going to toss it out. And I'm like, I have a more traditional approach to say, I don't know, but I'm going to respect the source and see what it is. And I don't necessarily follow it 100%. And that won't, follow that if I find some other reason not to. But there's also good to be respectful of the sources and good to follow the.
Oh yeah, I guess we will leave that one as a mystery then. We will see y'all next week with the next aphorism. We'll be jumping back to aphorism 20.